Good day, this is Thumbs United. Well, no, this is not Thumbs United, this is Live to Tape. We're recording our ASMR series, Flow, where I read classic stories live. And yeah, so we're reading the Junior Classics, Volume 1, and we're picking up where we left off, which is The Boy and the Wolves. So I'm going to read that story. We'll read a couple of stories. My goal is to get through an hour of stories, so we'll see how many we'll be able to fit in, but I think we'll be able to fit in at least 2 or 3, probably 3 or 4. They're like medium-sized stories. So let's get started. Oh, but first let me talk about what you're seeing. This is what you're seeing is a Steadicam kind of video where I built my own rig, and I'm just walking through different parks and everything. This was taken in fall of 2018, and yes, enjoy these scenes of nature while I record this story session. So here we go. The Boy and the Wolves, retold by Andrew Lang. Once upon a time, an Indian hunter built himself a house in the middle of a great forest, far away from his tribe, for his heart was gentle and kind, and he was weary of the treachery and the cruel deeds of those who had been his friends. So he left them and took his wife and 3 children, and they journeyed until they found a spot near to a clean stream, where they began to cut down trees and make ready for their wigwams. For many years they lived peacefully and happily in this sheltered place, never leaving it except to hunt the wild animals which served them both food and clothes. At last, however, the strong man fell sick, and before long Lion knew he must die. So he gathered his family around him and said his last words to them. "You, my wife, the companion of my days, will follow me ere many moons have wanted an island of the blessed. But you, my children, whose lives are but newly begun, the wickedness and unkindness and ingratitude from which I have fled are before you. Yet I shall go hence in peace, my children, if you will promise to love each other and never forsake your youngest brother." "Never," they replied, holding out their hands, and the hunter died content. Scarcely 8 moons had passed, when, just as he had said, the wife went forth and followed her husband, but before leaving her children, she bade the 2 elder ones to think of their promise never to forsake the younger, for he was a child and weak, and while the snow lay thick upon the ground, they tended him and cherished him. But when the earth showed green again, the heart of the young man stirred within him. He longed to see the wigwams of the village where his father's youth was spent. Therefore he opened all his heart to his sister, who answered, "My brother, I understand your longing for our fellow men, who here we cannot see, but remember our father's words. Shall we not seek our own pleasure and forget the little one?" But he would not listen, and making no reply, he took his bow and arrow and left the hut. The snow fell and melted, yet he never returned, and at last the heart of the girl grew cold and hard, and her little boy became a burden in her eyes. Till one day she spoke thus to him: "See, there is food for many days to come. Stay here within the shelter of the hut. I go to seek our brother, and when I have found him, I shall return hither." But when, after a hard journey, she reached the village where her brother dwelt, and saw that he had a wife and was happy, and when she too was sought by a young brave, then she also forgot the boy alone in the forest, and thought only of her husband. Now as soon as the little boy had eaten all the food which his sister had left him, he went out into the woods and gathered berries and dug up roots, and while the sun shone, he was contented and had his fill. But when the snow began and the winds howled, then his stomach felt empty and his limbs cold, and he hid in trees all the night, and only crept out to eat, what the wolves had left behind. It only crept out to eat what the wolves had left behind. And by, having no other friends, he sought their company, and sat by while they devoured their prey. And they grew to know him, and gave him food, and without them he would have died in the snow. But at last the snow melted, and the ice upon the great lake, and as the wolves went down to the shore, the boy went after them. It happened one day that his big brother was fishing in his canoe near the shore. He heard the voice of a child singing in the Indian tone, my brother, I am becoming a wolf, I am becoming a wolf." And when he had so sung, he howled as wolves howl. And then the heart of the elder sank, and he hastened toward him, crying, little brother, come to me." But he, being half wolf, only continued his song. And the louder the elder called him, little brother, come to me," the swifter he fled after his brothers, the wolves, and heavier grew his skin, till a long howl he vanished into the depths of the forest. So with shame and anguish in his soul, the elder brother went back to his village, and with his sister mourned the little boy and the broken promise till the end of his life. That's kind of a little bit of a depressing story. That's why you should never leave your younger siblings alone. They might turn into wolves. The next story is The Indian Who Lost His Wife, retold by Andrew Lang. Once upon a time there was a man and his wife who lived in the forest far away from the rest of the tribe. Very often they spent the day in hunting together, but after a while the wife found that she had so many things to do that she was obliged to stay at home. So he went alone, though he found that when his wife was not with him, he never had any luck. One day he was away hunting, the woman fell ill, and in a few days she died. Her husband grieved bitterly and buried her in the house where she had passed her life. But as time went on, he felt so lonely without her that he made a wooden doll about her height and her size for comfort, and dressed it in her clothes. He seated it in front of the fire and tried to think he had his wife back again. The next day he went out to hunt, and when he came home, the first thing he did was go up to the doll and brush off some of the ashes from the fire which had fallen on its face. But he was very busy now, for he had to cook and mend, besides getting food, for there was no one to help him, and so a whole year passed away. At the end of that time he came back from hunting one night, and found wood by the door and a fire within. The next night there was not only wood and fire, but a piece of meat in the kettle, nearly ready for eating. He searched all about to see who could have done this, but could find no one. The next time he went to hunt, he took care not to go far, and came in quite early. And while he was still a long way off, he saw a woman going into the house with food on her shoulders. So he made haste and opened the door quickly. Now, hold on. Okay. So we're going to continue on. I had a little bit of a scheduling conflict. Now to figure out where I was. At the end of that time, he came back from hunting one night and found some wood by the door and a fire within. The next night there was not only wood and fire, but a piece of meat in the kettle, and nearly ready for eating. He searched all about to see who could have done this, but could find no one. The next time he went to hunt, he took care not to go far, and came in quite early, and while he was still a long way off, he saw a woman going into that house with wood on her shoulder, so he made haste and opened the door quickly, and instead of the wooden doll, his wife sat in front of the fire. Then she spoke to him and said, "The Great Spirit felt sorry for you because you would not be comforted, so he let me come back to you, but you must not stretch out your hand to touch me till we have seen the rest of our people. If you do, I shall die." So the man listened to her words, and the woman dwelt there, and brought the wood, and kindled the fire, till one day her husband said to her, "It is now 2 years since you died. Let us now go back to our tribe. Then you will be well, and I can touch you." And with that he prepared food for the journey, and a string of deer flesh for her to carry, and one for himself. And so they started. Now the camp of the tribe was a distant 6-day journey, and when they were yet 1 day's journey off, it began to snow, and they felt weary and longed for rest. Therefore they made a fire, cooked some food, and spread out their skins to sleep. Then the heart of the man was greatly stirred, and he stretched out his arm to his wife, but she waved her hand and said, We have seen no one yet. It is too soon." But he would not listen to her, and caught her to him, and behold, he was clasping the wooden doll. And when he saw it was the doll, he pushed it from him, and in his misery rushed away to the camp, and told them all his story. And some doubted, and they went back with him to the place where he and his wife had stopped to rest. There lay the doll, and beside they saw in time snow the steps of 2 people, and the foot of one was like the foot of a doll, and the man grieved sore all the days of his life. And the next story is Punchkin. Once upon a time, there was a Raja who had several beautiful daughters. They were all good girls, but the youngest, named Bala, was more clever than the rest. The Raja's wife died when they were quite little children, so these 7 poor princesses were left with no mother to take care of them. The Raja's daughters took it in turns to cook their father's dinner every day, while he was absent deliberating with the ministers on the affairs of the nation. About this time, the Prudina had died, leaving a widow and 1 daughter. Every day, when the 7 princesses were preparing their father's dinner, the Prudina's widow and daughter would come to beg for a little fire from the hearth. The Bala used to say to the sisters, "Send that woman away. Send her away. Let her get the fire at her own house. What does she want with ours? If we allow her to come here, we shall suffer for it some day." But the sisters would answer, "Be quiet, Bala. Why must you always be quarreling with this poor woman? Let her take some fire, if she likes." Then the Purina's window used to go to the hearth, take a few sticks from it, and while no one was looking, she would quickly throw some mud in the midst of the dishes which were being prepared for the Raja's dinner. Now the Raja was very fond of his daughters, ever since their mother's death. They had cooked his dinner with their own hands, in order to avoid the dangers of being poisoned by his enemies. So when he found the mud mixed up in his dinner, he thought it must arise from their carelessness, as it did not seem likely that anyone should have put mud in there on purpose. But being very kind, he did not like to reprove them for it. Although this spoiling of the curry was repeated many days. At last one day he determined to hide, and watched his daughters cooking and see how it all happened. So he went into the next room and watched them through a hole in the wall. There he saw his 7 daughters carefully washing the rice, preparing the curry, and as each dish was completed, they put it by the fire, ready to be cooked. Next he noticed that Purina's widow come to the door, and begged for a few sticks from the fire to cook her dinner with. Bala turned to her angrily and said, "Why don't you keep fuel in your own house, and not come here every day and take ours? Sisters, don't give this woman any more wood. Let her buy it for herself." Then the eldest sister answered Bala, "Let this poor woman take the wood and the fire. She does us no harm." But Bala replied, "If you let her come here so often, maybe she will do us some harm, and make us sorry for it some day." The Raja saw Purina's widow go to the place where all his dinner was nicely prepared, and as she took the wood, she threw a little mud into each of the dishes. At this he was very angry, and sent to have the woman seized and brought before him. But when the widow came, she told him that she had played this trick because she wanted to gain an audience with him. And she spoke so cleverly and pleased him so well with her cunning words that instead of punishing her, the Raja married her and made her his Rani, and she and her daughter came to live in the palace. Now the new Rani hated the 7 poor princesses and wanted to get them, if possible, out of the way in order that her daughter might have all their riches and live in the palace as princess in their place. And instead of being grateful to them for their kindness to her, she did all she could to make them miserable. She gave them nothing but bread to eat, and very little of that, and very little water to drink. So these 7 little princesses, who had been accustomed to having everything comfortable about them, and good food and good clothes all their lives long, were very miserable and unhappy, and they used to go out every day and sit by their dead mother's tomb and cry and say, "Oh mother, mother, cannot you see our poor children, how unhappy we are, how we are starved by our cruel stepmother?" One day, while they were thus sobbing and crying, lo and behold, a beautiful pomelo tree grew up out of the grave, covered with fresh, ripe pomelos, and the children satisfied their hunger by eating some of the fruit. And every day after this, instead of trying to eat the bad dinner their stepmother provided them, they used to go out to their mother's grave and eat the pomelos, which grew there on the beautiful tree. When the Rani said to her daughter, "I cannot tell how it is every day those 7 girls say they don't want any dinner and won't eat any, and yet they never grow thin nor look ill. They look better than you do. I cannot tell how it is." And she bade her watch the 7 princesses and see if anyone gave them anything to eat. So the next day, when the princesses went to their mother's grave and were eating the beautiful pomelos, the Purina's daughter followed them and saw them gathering the fruit. Then Bala said to her sisters, "Do you not see that girl watching us? Let us drive her away, or hide the pomelos, else she will go and tell her mother all about it, and that will be bad for us." But the other sisters said, "Oh no, do not be unkind, Bala. The girl would never be so cruel as to tell her mother. Let us rather invite her to come and have some of the fruit." And calling her to them, they gave her one of the pomelos. No sooner had she eaten it, however, than the Purina's daughter went home and said to her mother, I do not wonder the 7 princesses will not eat dinner, you prepare for them. For by their mother's grave there grows a beautiful pomelo tree, and they go there every day and eat the pomelos. I ate one, and it was the nicest I ever tasted." The cruel Renee was much vexed at hearing this, and all the next day she stayed in her room and told Raja that she had a very bad headache. The Raja was deeply grieved and said to his wife, "What can I do for you?" She answered, "There is only one thing that will make my headache well. By your dead wife's tomb there grows a fine pomelo tree. You must bring that here and boil it, root and branches, and put a little of the water in which it had been boiled on my forehead, and that will cure my headache." So the Raja sent his servants and had the beautiful pomelo tree pulled up by the roots, and did as the Renee desired. And when some of the water in which it had been boiled was put on her forehead, he said her headache had gone, and she felt quite well. Next day, when the seven princesses went as usual to the grave of their mother, the pomelo tree had disappeared. Then they all began to cry very bitterly. Now there was by the Renee tomb a small tank, and as they were crying, they saw the tank was filled with a rich cream-like substance, which quickly hardened into a thick white cake. At seeing this, all the princesses were very glad, and they ate some of the cake and liked it. And the next day the same thing happened, and so it went on for many days. Every morning the princesses went to their mother's grave and found the little tank filled with nourishing cream-like cake. Then the cruel stepmother said to her daughter, "I cannot tell how it is. I had the pomelo tree which used to grow by the Renee's grave destroyed, and yet the princesses grow no thinner, nor look more sad, though they never eat the dinner I give them. I cannot tell how it is." And her daughter said, "I will watch." The next day, while the princesses were eating the cream cake, who should come by but their stepmother's daughter. Bala saw her first and said, "See, sisters, there comes that girl again. Let us sit round the edge of the tank and not allow her to see it, for if we give her some of our cake, she will go and tell her mother, and that will be very unfortunate for us." The other sisters, however, thought Bala unnecessarily suspicious, and instead of following her advice, they gave the Purina's daughter some of the cake, and she went home and told her mother all about it. The Renee, on hearing how well the princess fared, was exceedingly angry, and sent her servants to pull down the dead Renee's tomb and fill the little tank with the ruins. And not content with this, she next day pretended to be very ill in fact, at the point of death, when the Renee was much grieved and asked whether it was in his power to produce her any remedy. She said to him, "Only one thing can save my life, but I know you will not do it." He replied, "Yes, whatever it is, I will do it." She then said, "To save my life, you must kill the 7 daughters of your first wife, and put some of their blood on my forehead and on the palm of my hands, and their death will be my life." At these words the Raja was very sorrowful, but because he feared to break his word, he went out with a heavy heart to find his daughters. He found them crying by the ruins of their mother's grave. Then, feeling he could not kill them, the Raja spoke kindly to them and told them to come out into the jungle with him, and there he made a fire and cooked some rice and gave it to them. But in the afternoon, it being very hot, the 7 princesses all fell asleep, and when he saw they were fast asleep, the Raja, their father, stole away and left them, for he feared his wife, saying to himself, It is better my poor daughter should die here than be killed by their stepmother." He then shot a deer, and returning home, put some of its blood on the forehead and hands of the Renee, and she thought then that she had really killed the princesses, and said she felt quite well. Meantime the 7 princesses awoke, and when they found themselves all alone in the thick jungle, they were much frightened, and began to call out as loud as they could in the hopes of making their father hear. But he was by that time far away, and would not have been able to hear them, even if their voices had been as loud as thunder. It so happened that this very day the 7 young sons of a neighboring Raja chanced to be hunting in that same jungle, and as they were returning home after the day's sport was over, the youngest prince said to his brothers, "Stop, I think I hear some crying and calling out. Do you not hear voices? Let us go in the direction of the sound, and find out what it is." So the 7 princes rode through the woods until they came to the place where the 7 princesses sat crying and wringing their hands. At the sight of them, the young princes were very much astonished, and still more on learning their story, and they settled that each should take one of these poor forlorn ladies home with him and marry her. The first and eldest prince took the eldest princess home with him and married her, and the second took the second, the third took the third, the fourth took the fourth, and the fifth took the fifth, and the sixth took the sixth, and the seventh, and the handsomest of all, took the beautiful Bala. And when they got to their own land, there was great rejoicing throughout the kingdom at the marriage of the 7 young princes and the 7 such beautiful princesses. About a year after this, Bala had a little son, and his uncles and aunts were so fond of the boy that it was as if he had 7 fathers and 7 mothers. None of the other princesses or princes had any children, so the son of the 7th prince and Bala was acknowledged as their heir by all the rest. They thus had lived very happily for some time, when one fine day the 7th prince, Bala's husband, said he would go out hunting, and away he went, and they waited long for him, but he never came back. Then his 6 brothers said they would go and see what had become of him, and they went away, but they also did not return. And the 7 princesses grieved very much, for they had feared that their kind husbands must have been killed. One day not long after this happened, as Bala was rocking her baby's cradle, and while her sisters were working in the room below, there came to the palace door a man in a long black dress, who said he was the fakir who came to beg. The servant said to him, "You cannot go into the palace. The Raja's sons have all gone away. We think they must be dead, and their widows cannot be interrupted by your begging." "But," he said, "I am a holy man. You must let me in." And the stupid servants let him walk through the palace. They did not know that this was no Farkin, but a wicked magician named Punchkin. Farkin wandered through the palace and saw many beautiful things there, till at last he reached the room where Bala sat, singing beside her little boy's cradle. The magician thought her more beautiful than all the other beautiful things he had seen, insomuch that he asked her to go home with him and to marry him. But she said, "My husband, I fear, is dead, but my little boy is still quite young. I will stay here and teach him to grow up a clever man, and when he is grown up, he shall go out into the world and try to learn the tidings of his father. Heaven forbid that I should ever leave him or marry Jan." At these words the magician was very angry, and turned her into a little black dog, and led her away, saying, "Since Jan will not come with me of your own free will, I will make you." So the poor princess was dragged away without any power or effecting an escape, or letting her sisters know what had become of her. As Punchkin passed through the palace gate, The servants said to him, "Where did you get that pretty little dog?" And he answered, "One of the princesses gave it to me as a present." At hearing which, they let him go without further questioning. Soon after this, the 6 elder princesses heard the little baby, their nephew, begin to cry, and when they went upstairs, they were much surprised to find him all alone, and Bala nowhere to be seen. Then they questioned the servants, and when they heard of the Farkin and the little black dog, they guessed at what happened, and sent in every direction seeking them. But neither the Farkin nor the dog were to be found. What could 6 poor women do? They gave up all hopes of ever seeing their kind husbands, and their sister, and her husband again, and devoted themselves henceforth to teaching and taking care of their little nephew. Thus time went on till Bala's son was 14 years old. Then one day his aunts told him the history of the family, and no sooner did he hear it than he was seized with a great desire to go in search of his father and mothers and uncles, and if he could find them alive, to bring them home again. His aunts, on learning his determination, were much alarmed and tried to dissuade him, saying, "We have lost our husbands, and our sister, and her husband, and you are now our sole hope. If you go away, what shall we do?" But he replied, "I pray you not be discouraged. I will return soon, and if it is possible, bring my father and mother and uncles with me." So he set out on his travels, but for some months he could learn nothing to help him in his search. At last, after he had journeyed many hundreds of weary miles and become almost hopeless of ever hearing anything further of his parents, he one day came into a country that seemed full of stones and rocks and trees, and there he saw a large palace with a tower. Hard by was a Malay little house. He was looking about, and the Malay's wife saw him and ran out of the house and said, "My dear boy, who are you that dare venture into this dangerous place?" He answered, "I am Raja's son, and I come in search of my father and my uncles, and my mother, who a wicked enchanter bewitched." Then the Malay's wife said, "This country and this palace belong to a great enchanter. He is all-powerful, and if anyone displeases him, he can turn them into stones and trees. All the rocks and trees you see here were living people once, and the magician turned them into what they are now. Some time ago, a Raja's son came here, and shortly afterward came his 6 brothers, and they were all turned into stones and trees. And these are not only the unfortunate ones, for up in the tower lives a beautiful princess, who the magician has kept prisoner there for 12 years, because she hates him and will not marry him." Then the little prince thought, "These must be my parents and my uncles. I have found what I seek at last." So he told his story to the Malay's wife, begged her to help him to remain in that place a while and inquire further concerning the unhappy people she mentioned, as she promised to befriend him, and advised his disguising himself, lest the magician should see him and turn him likewise into stone. To this the prince agreed. So the Malay's wife dressed him up in a charret and pretended that he was her daughter. One day not long after this, as the magician was walking in his garden, he saw the little girl, as he thought, playing about, and he asked her who she was. She told him that she was the Malay's daughter, and the magician said, "You are a pretty little girl, and tomorrow you shall take a present of flowers from me to the beautiful lady who lives in the tower." The young prince was much delighted at hearing this, and went immediately to inform the Mali's wife, after consulting with whom he determined that it would be more safe for him to retain his disguise, and trust to the chance of favorable opportunity for establishing some communication with his mother, if it were indeed she. Now it happened that at Bala's marriage, her husband had given her a small gold ring on which her name was engraved, and she had put it on her little son's finger when he was a baby, and afterwards, when he was older, his aunts had it enlarged for him, so that he was still able to wear it. The Mali's wife advised him to fasten the well-known treasure to one of the bouquets, and he presented to his mother, and trust her recognizing it. This was not to be done without difficulty, as such a strict watch was kept over the poor princess, for fear of her ever establishing communication with her friends, that though the supposed Mali's daughter was permitted to take the flowers every day, the magician or one of his slaves always in the room at the time. At last one day, however, opportunity favored him, and when no one was looking, the boy tied the ring to the nosegay, and threw it at Bala's feet. It fell with a clang on the floor, and Bala, looking to see what made the strange sound, found the little ring tied to the flowers. On recognizing it, she at once believed the story her son told her of his long search, and begged him to advise her as what she had better do, at the same time entreating him on no account to endanger his life by trying to rescue her. She told him that for 12 long years the magician had kept her shut up in the tower because she refused to marry him, and she was so closely guarded that she saw no hope of release. Now Bala's son was a bright, clever boy, so he said, "Do not fear, dear mother, for the first thing I do is to discover how far the magician's power extends, in order that we may be able to liberate my father and uncles, whom he has imprisoned in the form of rocks and trees. You have spoken to him angrily for 12 long years. Now rather speak kindly. Tell him you have given up all hopes of again seeing the husband you have so long mourned, and say you are willing to marry him. Then endeavor to find out what his powers consist in, and whether he is immortal or can be put to death." Bala determined to take her son's advice, and the next day sent for Punchkin, and spoke to him as had been suggested. The magician, greatly delighted, begged her to allow the wedding to take place as soon as possible. But she told him that before she married him, he must allow her a little more time, in which she might make his acquaintance, and that, after being enemies so long, their friendship could be but strengthened by degrees. "And do tell me," she said, "are you quite immortal? Can death never touch you? And are you too great an enchanter to ever feel human suffering?" "Why do you ask?" he said. "Because," she replied, "if I am to be your wife, I would like to fain know all about you, in order, if any calamity threatens you, to overcome, or if possible, to avert it. It is true," he added, "that I am not as others. Far away, hundreds of thousands of miles from this, there lies a desolate country, covered with thick jungle. In the midst of the jungle grows a circle of palm trees, and in the center of the circle stand six containers full of water, piled one above another. Below the sixth container is a small cage which contains a little green parrot. On the life of the parrot depends my life, and if the parrot is killed, I must die. It is, however," he added, "impossible that the parrot should sustain any injury, both on the account of the inaccessibility of the country, and because by my appointment, many thousand genies surround the palm trees and kill all who approach the place." Bana told her son what Punchkin had said, but at the same time implored him to give up all idea of getting the parrot. The prince, however, replied, "Mother, unless I can get a hold of this parrot, you and my fathers and uncles cannot be liberated. Be not afraid, I will shortly return. Do you, meantime, keep the magician in good humor still, putting off your marriage with him on various pretexts, and before he finds out the cause of delay, I will be here." So saying, he went away. Many weary miles did he travel, till at last he came to a thick jungle, and being very tired, sat down under a tree and fell asleep. He was awakened by a soft rustling sound, and looking about him saw a large serpent, which was making its way to an eagle's nest built in the tree under which he lay. And in the nest were 2 young eagles. The prince, seeing the danger of the young birds, drew his sword and killed the serpent. At the same moment a rushing sound was heard in the air, and the 2 eagles who had been out hunting for food for their young ones returned. They quickly saw the dead serpent and the young prince standing over it, and the old mother eagle said to him, "Dear boy, for many years all our young ones have been devoured by that cruel serpent. You have now saved the lives of our children. Whenever you are in need, therefore, send to us, and we will help you. And as for these little eagles, take them and let them be your servants." At this the prince was very glad, and the 2 eagles crossed their wings, on which he mounted, and they carried him far over the thick jungle until he came to the place where grew the circle of palm trees, in the midst of which stood the 6 containers full of water. In the middle of the day, and the heat was very great, all round the trees were the genies fast asleep. Nevertheless, there were such countless thousands of them that it would have been quite impossible for anyone to walk through their ranks to the place. Down swooped the strong-winged eagles. Down jumped the prince. In an instant he had overthrown the 6 containers full of water and seized the little green parrot, which he rolled up in his cloak. While he mounted into the air again, all the genies below awoke, and finding the treasure gone, set up a wild, melancholy howl. Away flew the little eagles, till they came to their home in the great tree. Then the prince said to the old eagles, "Take back your little ones, they have done me good service. If ever again I stand in need of help, I will not fail to come to you." He then continued his journey on foot till he arrived once more at the magician's palace, where he sat down at the door and began playing with the parrot. Punchkin saw him and came to him quickly and said, "My boy, where did you get that parrot? Give it to me, I pray you." But the prince answered, "Oh no, I cannot give you away my parrot. It is a great pet of mine. I have had it many years." Then the magician said, "If it is an old favorite, I can understand you not caring to give it away. But come, what will you sell it for?" "Sir," said the prince, "I cannot sell my parrot." Then Punchkin got frightened and said, Anything, name what price you will, and it shall be yours." The prince answered, "Let the 7 Raja's son, whom you turned into rocks and trees, be instantly liberated." "It is done, as you desire," said the magician. "Only give me my parrot." And with that, by a stroke of his wand, Bala's husband and his brothers were resumed to their natural shapes. "Now give me my parrot," repeated Punchkin. "Not so fast, my master," rejoined the prince. I must first beg that you restore to life all whom you have thus imprisoned." The magician immediately waved his wand, and again, whilst he cried, in an imploring voice, "Give me my parrot," the whole garden became suddenly alive, Where rocks and stones and trees had been before, stood Rajas and Punts and Siddars and mighty men on prancing horses and jeweled pages and troops of armed attendants. "Give me my parrot," cried Punchkin. Then the boy took hold of the parrot and tore off one of its wings, and as he did so the magician's right arm fell off. Punchkin then stretched out his left arm, crying, "Give me my parrot." The prince pulled off the parrot's second wing, and the magician's left arm tumbled off. "Give me my parrot," he said, and fell on his knees. The prince pulled off the parrot's right leg, and the magician's right leg fell off. The prince pulled off the parrot's left leg, and down the magician fell left, and down fell the magician's left, nothing remaining of him save the limbless body and the head, but till he rolled his eyes and cried, "Give me my parrot." "Take your parrot, then," cried the boy, and with that he wrung the bird's neck and threw it at the magician, and as he did so, Punchkin's head twisted around, and with a fearful groan, he died. Then they let Bala out of the tower, and she and her son and the 7 princes went to their own country and lived happily ever afterwards. And as to the rest of the world, every went to his own house. That was the last story. And for the next episode of Flow, we will continue off with how the sun, moon, and wind went out to dinner. I want to thank everyone for coming out to this live stream of Live to Tape. We're going to be doing this more regularly. I think maybe on the weekends. We'll see. I might alternate between doing Halo Reach with Thumbs United and doing Live to Tape. But we'll see. I have to look at the analytics and see how well this does. But I want to thank everyone for coming out. I will see everyone tomorrow. I'll be reading more Live to Tape content, and hope to see everyone there. Bye-bye.